Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Welcome back to Southeast Radio's Business Matters with me, Karl Fitzpatrick. Well, my next guest, Robert Nolan, is a private investigator and he's also the chairman of the Irish Professional Private Investigators Association. Robert, perhaps you might start the interview by providing us with an overview of the association.
The association was formed in 2015. It was formed really in response to the licensing that was impending in November 2015. And the industry got together and basically wanted to represent ourselves properly because there had been a little bit of bad press around that time in relation to data leaks and private investigators. And we felt that we were a little bit maligned and it was non-representative of the association. So with the government, we basically consulted, and over a process of several months, licensing began in November 2015. I should say that IPPIA as an organisation has done an awful lot to improve the standards within the industry and to educate members. And in fact, we have initiated a code of conduct, which cost us a few thousand euro. We got together with a data protection specialist and we came up with a pretty good code. We placed that code now before the DPC, Data Protection Commissioner, and we're hoping for an approval on the code.
And did the industry welcome licensing at the time?
Yeah, overwhelmingly, I would say yes. Now, obviously, there was a couple of dissenters, but they were more worried perhaps with somehow being priced out of the market by regulation fees, or they were a little bit worried about larger companies coming in and stepping on the smaller operator, because the industry is made up really of one-man shows in a lot of ways. The majority of the industry is made up of that. There are some security companies out there, and there were some concerns over that. But once those concerns were put aside and the PSA explained the process, we were definitely in favour of licensing to weed out cowboys and rogue operators within the industry. Now, in 2019, there's about 109 licensed. Many of the 109 would be a mix. They wouldn't just be private investigators. People would have applied for the license because the license gives you an ability to investigate. If you were handed money and asked to find somebody, you need a license to do it. If a solicitor was even asked, look, can you trace somebody, even a simple land registry search, if he's paid to do that with the specific purpose of locating someone, he needs a license to do that. If a summons server calls to the door, and they may make inquiries locally, but if they have to go outside the local inquiries, perhaps because the person's name on the summons has moved on, they need a license to do that. And out of the 109, there would be about 30 what I consider private investigators that offer the full range of service that an investigator would offer. Others would be summons servers, debt collectors and security firms.
So how does the Irish Professional Private Investigators Association support its members?
Mainly through communication and through representation with the PSA. The Private Security Authority comes up with a new regulation, or they're trying to follow through on the Private Security Act of 2004, because they've been unfolding it slowly over several years. We basically liaise with them primarily, and we try and come up with something that's going to work.
And Robert, I'd be interested in finding out about your own background and how you ended up working as a private investigator.
I've always been interested in it. Old TV shows as a teenager and as a kid growing up. I loved the Rockford Files, Magnum PI, all that stuff. In my early 20s, I found I came into contact with a private investigator who was an ex-guard. And I found the stories fascinating. And I said, wow, this was the first private investigator I've ever met. And it was something I wanted to do. But I kind of got sidetracked into a family business. And after a while, when I broke free from the family business, I set up my own business. And that's what I've been doing for the last 11 years.
And typically, who are your clients and why do they engage your services?
Clients vary from the commercial interests. You would get commercial clients. They could be multinational corporations. You would also get a number of employers who might employ you for insurance reasons. You might have an employer who wants to go down the private route of paying an investigator rather than using the insurance investigator. And this could be done for a number of reasons. He might have problems with his insurance premiums. He might not have paid insurance, or he might have a good old sense of he needs justice on this. And he feels in his bones that the claimant is pulling the wool over his eyes. And he just wants us to go out there and prove what he's saying is true. Solicitors would be our main employers, and they would employ us for address verifications, or this would be a typical court process. You have a summons for somebody, but you've called to an address, and either the person is not answering the door or they've moved on. And an awful lot of people during the judicial process at one stage will be frustrated in some way because the person that they're trying to sue for whatever reason, maybe they were a cowboy builder, maybe he was an ex-business partner that's run off with the funds, whatever the reason happens to be, they become frustrated because obviously that claimant may not be the most honourable, that the other person they're trying to trace may not be the most honourable of people, and they may be trying to frustrate the legal process. That's when an investigator comes in. So a solicitor may hire us and say, look, I'm looking for this person. Or a solicitor may hire us and say, can you serve a summons on this person? Or a solicitor may hire us to say, I have a case coming up. Testimony has already been given. And I believe that some of this testimony is false. And I need an investigator to go out there and prove that it's false.
And when you're completing a surveillance assignment, what process do you follow?
A surveillance assignment in an insurance case, for instance, would probably begin very early in the morning, somewhere in darkness mostly, and you're waiting for the subject or the person, the claimant that you're waiting on, to get up in the morning and see what they do with their day. Generally speaking, they might go to work and so on. So if they go to work, we like to log where they're working, and it's really to test what they've said already and just to verify what they've said is true.
Now, of course, insurance fraud has hit the headlines in recent years. Do you have any memorable cases in this particular area?
Yeah, a lot. We've had a lot of claims dismissed before they've reached court for various different reasons. I think that on one particular case, I remember I was given an address of the claimant, and I was told the instruction was to go out there, conduct surveillance and investigate anything that might be relevant. So when I went out to the house, he wasn't there. So then I had to go back. I traced another address. I found it, and immediately I spotted that his wife was at the address, but there was no sign of him either. So I made some inquiries with the neighbours, and I found out that there had never been a man living at that address, despite the fact that they'd only been married a couple of years. So that began to ring alarm bells with me. I went back to the employer and I relayed what I found. And between the jigs and the reels, it turned out that the man had an arranged marriage, and the information was passed on to the Garda National Immigration Bureau, and he was deported.
Now, late last year, there was a case whereby a bank who hired a private investigator had to settle a case for damages because they provided personal data to an investigator. So does GDPR pose a threat to investigators?
GDPR is it's really up there on our agenda in terms of the parameters in which we can work in. As I said earlier, we went to a huge length, which took me about a year of consultations with an expert in the field to try and come up with a code of conduct in relation to GDPR. So it is something we take very seriously.
What is the relationship like between private investigators and Gardaí? Is it one of collaboration or otherwise?
Mostly it's one of collaboration. And when I say collaboration, obviously the guards they don't pass on information to investigators. That's not how it works. But if we come across a case and somewhere it verges on the criminal, so we would start out with a civil case potentially, and then somewhere along the line it turns into a criminal case. You notice criminal activity. You might be chasing, counterfeit goods for a multinational company, and all of a sudden you realize that, yes, there are counterfeit goods, and this could be a very professional operation with perhaps several thousands of euro changing hands that you know of. That's when you call the guards in. And in my experience, and in any cases that turned into a criminal matter, I have had a good relationship with the Guardi that I have dealt with.
What are the other emerging trends in the world of private investigation?
In relation to investigators going forward, I think that awareness of what investigators can do would really open up more doors in terms of people using them. If you've ever gone through a judicial process where you believe the testimony given was false, that's the time to call the investigator. If there's a solicitor out there that is still perhaps tracing people either for debt chasing and so on, they need to realize that that is now a licensable activity and they should be letting an investigator know it.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
South